Hello and welcome to Are You Prepared to Recover Your Virtual Machines from Ransomware? Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's presentation, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to get started with Rubrik, a best practices guide for recovering from ransomware attacks, and a definitive guide to zero trust data security. Also, in those resources, there's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access all those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be starting somebody's weekend off right with a $250 Amazon gift card for one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the terms and conditions link there. Okay, with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter, Mike Tellinghuisen, who's Director and Platform Specialist for Rubrik. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction. We're going to talk about cyber recovery, how it can be different than traditional recovery, and how Rubrik can provide the big red easy button when it comes to a cyber recovery. So let's hop in. Quick agenda will focus on what we hear from customers for current pain and challenges that they're trying to solve, and we'll wrap that up with Rubrik Security Cloud. We'll map that back to the broader Rubrik offering and how it fits in with Rubrik as your overall data protection and data security solution. Lastly, we'll walk through a demo showing the interface to give you a little sense of what a day in the life may look like. While this list isn't in any specific order, we're starting to hear more and more about the first point. We've always had concerns about threats within the guest operating system with things like WannaCry, Ryuk, or SamSam ransomware variants, but a more recent threat is targeting the hypervisor host directly and encrypting the virtual machine disk files. As most companies are highly virtualized these days, you can imagine how quickly a large percentage of your infrastructure could be encrypted and brought offline. The challenge with a cyber recovery versus a traditional recovery is with traditional recovery, you generally know what it is that you're trying to recover. You have server A and you want to recover it from yesterday. With cyber recovery, you don't generally know all of the systems that you'll need to recover, nor to what point in time you need to recover them from. Beyond the security aspect, complexity of the solution is another challenge. And it kind of goes hand in hand with scalability. What does my initial footprint look like to manage on a day-to-day basis? How different or how difficult is it to manage all the different aspects of the solution? Data protection, data security, and data observability. And can it easily expand with me as my company grows in 1, 3, or 5 years and beyond? Lastly, compliance. Infrastructure may not be limited to simply what's in your data center or your co-location facility these days. You may have workloads in the public cloud, maybe leveraging software as a service. Email with Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace is also a great example here. How do you ensure that across all of your different workloads you're protecting across all of those different environments that you are compliant with your business objectives for those recovery points? You have to be right every single time, but the attacker only has to be right once. And when that attack happens, you generally have two options. You can pay the criminals or you can recover from backups. And the attackers know your options as well, which is why they go after your data in addition to the backup copies. Their efforts are always focused on increasing their chances of a payday. So the typical backup infrastructure, and especially more legacy backup infrastructure, may look like this. It's generally not designed for an attacker behind the firewall. There's often open network protocols. It may be running on top of Windows. Does the solution support the use of time-based one-time passwords or MFA? And if not, would a simple credential compromise threaten the entire backup infrastructure? There are many different entry points for an attacker to focus on when working with these disparate solutions. And if you have data in the cloud, your challenges only become more complex. Cloud doesn't solve operational challenges, it puts a magnifying glass on them. I think we would all agree that for end-to-end cybersecurity, we first need to have infrastructure security. If you have a house, you need to close your windows and lock your doors. And to be clear, Rubrik isn't replacing anything in your infrastructure stack. What we are saying is that if all of your lines of defense fail, then Rubrik is going to help you understand and recover by providing data security. As we mentioned before, the challenge the business faces when it comes to preventing and defending attacks is that you have to be right every single time. The attacker only has to be right once. Rubrik provides that data security with the Rubrik Security Cloud, and we feel we're in a unique spot protecting all of our customers' data. And when we launched one of our first data security modules 6 years ago at VMworld, it resonated so well that we won the Gold Award at VMworld in the security category. All of the components that you see on the screen are Rubrik built and developed. We don't agree with the approach of bolting on third-party integrations from a store or a container registry that would end up having privileged access on the system. We prefer to control the integration and maintain our zero trust first principles throughout. Whether it's a cyber recovery or a traditional infrastructure recovery, recovery time objectives are critical. Rubrik has worked hard to constantly build upon our success of our initial offering almost 10 years ago with VMware. You can be running AHV, Hyper-V, or VMware in your data center, and we will have a consistent UI and management for those objects, as well as scalable and predictable recovery performance. Also, quality of life improvements. We have a maniacal focus on making the data protection lives of our customers as easy as possible. And that includes things like excluding temporary data to save on overall space in the solution. Also, the ability to define what happens before and after the snapshot takes place. A common use case here is for some type of a freeze-thaw operation with the actual snapshot happening in the middle. Our primary focus when the company started was to address the fragmentation that we saw within the market. If you think back to 8 to 10 years ago, data protection was a sprawling mess, and for some, it still is today. There are a lot of different vendors and components in a data protection solution. You might have tapes along with a library. You likely have storage that you've allocated out for storing the backups, and the data protection software itself, which may have a catalog server, a media agent, an indexing server, a web server for the UI, a workflow server, a compliance search server, an analytics server, a proxy machine, agents. You get the idea. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of OS level updates to maintain underneath. So our initial offering was to converge all of those components, and not only converge, but to ensure that we had redundancy throughout the stack. There is no single point of failure with a catalog server, as an example. Rubrik is a true scale-out architecture. The benefit of converging all of these components together was the security posture that we were able to improve because of it. We have an in-house purpose-built file system that doesn't sit on your network. This isn't a storage platform with an SMB or NFS share that's opened up to other systems. We've built on that foundation of zero trust data security and ensured that we've remained in the visionary quadrant. And this has led us to expanding not only to cover your on-premises workloads, but also your cloud-based workloads, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And doing that while staying true to our roots of simplified data protection. The same policy can be applied across all of these workloads. Along the way, we've found ourselves assisting with more recovery scenarios where the customer had been impacted by ransomware. Our platform was perfect for ensuring that the data could be recovered, but we also realized that we had an opportunity to expand our value. If you think of a traditional backup environment, you might have backups running overnight, and then the bulk of the system might sit idle throughout the day. Since we have all of the backup data, our thought was, why not add additional value from services that could run on the cluster, especially during times when the system would be idle anyways? And so our first offering was ransomware alerting and investigation. We used this tool to detect when the event happened and allow the customer to quickly recover to the point they needed, building on top of our secure, immutable file system. At a high level, this tool would work by detecting the encryption event itself. But a common question that we'd hear is, what about when the ransomware sits idle for a period of time? That is where our threat hunting component comes into play. We'll identify the type of ransomware that was found, and from there, we can leverage a YARA rule, file hash, or whatever is appropriate to scan the entire environment to find that proverbial needle in a haystack. This will hone in on not only where it originated, but more importantly, when. And from there, we know the clean copy to recover from. Lastly, another tool that we've added is the ability to search for sensitive data. Here we can look for PII, PCI, CCPA, and other commonly defined data types, as well as the ability to search for custom defined entries like an employee number or perhaps invoice numbers. Since this is running on the data that we're already storing, it's as easy as enabling a radio button to turn it on. There is no software to deploy, architecture to think about, or anything like that. And because it's so easy, we've often seen customers try it out. And on more than one occasions, we've found some customers that were a little surprised about some of the sensitive data sitting where it probably shouldn't be. Rubrik Security Cloud is built on 3 core pillars. The first is data resilience, and this is where we provide a bulletproof solution built on top of that zero trust design. This is key, as a common question that we hear from CIOs and CISOs is, during a time of crisis, do I have the ability to recover my data? There's a lot of nuance to this question because data immutability has become a popular buzzword. Most vendors at this point are saying that they support it, but data immutability by itself is not enough. We worked with a now current customer that had a different data protection solution at the time that supported data immutability. They felt like the box was checked and that in that time of need, they'd be able to recover successfully. What they found out was that the attacker used NTP poisoning and fast-forwarded the clocks on their systems. This triggered the expiration of all of the data, as the time was now beyond what their retention was configured for, and they lost all copies of data within their backup repository. That particular vendor functioned exactly as it should have. If it was configured for 30 days of retention, and the attacker moved the clock forward 45 days, all of those backups are expired, and they should have been deleted. Rubrik has a few solutions to counter this attack, And one is that we leverage a monotonic clock within each system. This is a hardware-based timer that is used in conjunction with the system time. And if the system time is advanced, but the monotonic clock hasn't counted enough time, it will assume that there's an issue that needs to be looked at instead of just expiring the data. And so the main takeaway here is that the threat actors are going to continue to evolve, and we're committed to working hard to stay ahead of the curve and innovate as well. The second pillar is data observability. And these are really the insights that we glean by understanding how that data has changed over time. And then that last pillar is data remediation. And this is all about recovery, but not just ordinary data recovery, also cyber recovery. This is the pillar that allows you to provide that confidence and predictability in your recovery SLAs. To run through how this works, regardless of the type of data that you have in your private or public cloud, or it could even be SaaS applications like Microsoft 365, as we mentioned, we first provide an immutable and air-gapped copy, or you may hear this referred to as a bunker in a box. Next, we build a time series of your data. If you're taking a backup every hour, every day, every week, every month, we know exactly what is happening to that data over time. And with the metadata of that time series, we feel that gives us a unique advantage to provide context to the data. It's important to know that we can protect your most critical workloads where they live. Unstructured or structured data, physical or virtual, cloud, on-premises, or containers. We'll protect all of it under the Rubrik Security Cloud umbrella. A common question that my team receives is around scale and if we can support some of the largest workloads. When we talk about scale of our solution, there's really two different ways that we can scale. We can scale out, and we have customers with over 100 nodes within a single multi-petabyte cluster. And then we also have customers that have a lot of remote office, branch office locations. In the case of retail, it could be every store location that's all connected up into a single Rubrik Security Cloud instance to give an easy-to-use single interface for your day-to-day management, compliance, reporting, as well as auditing and alerting. You can see some of the statistics on our VMware customers here in terms of data protected, as well as quantity of virtual machines. One of our largest databases is now over 600 terabytes on Oracle. And while that is already enormous, it's well on its way to being over 1 petabyte in size in the near future. When it comes to unstructured data, scale out and scale up both come into play. We have customers with very large files being protected, like media files or flat file databases, as well as customers with massive quantities of small files. Not only are these being protected, but still meeting our customers' recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives for restores. I'm going to hop into the UI now and show you some of the features that I've just been talking about. Starting from my global dashboard, I have different widgets on my screen that are showing all three pillars of the solution: data observability, data resilience, and data remediation. I'm going to click on data protection and then move into the SLA domains. So the SLA domain is where we map business policy to the protection requirements. To start with, I'm going to select what I'm looking to protect, and I can always adjust this later, but what I select will help determine what, if any, additional screens in the wizard may pop up. So an example would be if I select SQL databases, I'll get a screen about log backups. But if I were only going to back up Nutanix VMs, that wouldn't make sense to show the SQL configuration settings at this point. Next is where I input my business logic. So if I want to back up every day for 32 days, and then maybe I want a monthly for 13 months and a yearly for 5 years, I can easily put that in. And then configuring jobs or schedules is not necessary because Rubrik ensures that we meet the policy that you define. By default, all backups are stored on Rubrik. And you can see here it's saying that for 5 years, because on the previous screen, that's what I defined as my maximum retention. We've got the flexibility to store your longer term archives somewhere else. So you may want to leverage the elasticity of the cloud for your long-term archive storage, or perhaps you have an investment in some on-premises storage already, and you'd like to repurpose to hold these backups. Generally, my rule of thumb when talking with customers is, where do 80% of your restore requests come from? Is it within the last 7 days, the last 14 days, the last 30 days? Wherever that number is, that might be a good rule of thumb for what to leave on Rubrik as that recovery cache. And then that 20% that's left over, that long-term storage is where you could go and send that off to some other tier of disk. So in my case, I'll go ahead and set this to 30 days to keep on Rubrik as my recovery cache. And then I can select the cluster and the archive location, which in this case is AWS. Upon doing that, you can see I have some different options below for the tier of storage within AWS. I want to keep the data in. There's also the option for an instant archive down below, which is basically saying, do you want only the data after 30 days to be stored on that archive location, or do you want all of the data, so from day 0 all the way through 5 years, to be in that archive location? Next, I can determine if I want to replicate the data as well. So maybe I want to send it to another Rubrik cluster. It just depends on how many copies of the backup data you need. Lastly, give it a name. I can see down below, I have my summary configured. Hit create, and I would be ready to go. Once that SLA is created, now I just need to go and assign it to the different objects that I want to protect. So in my case, I'm going to come over here to Hyper-V, clusters and hosts. I can just do a select all, manage protection, and then find the SLA that I created that I'd want to assign to it. In my case, I'll just say bronze. In my case, I already have some of these that are configured with an SLA. So it's asking me, what do I want to do with the 4 that already are configured with something? I could say inherit from parent. And now again, since those were configured with an SLA already, it's asking, what do you want to do with those existing snapshots that have an SLA set to them? And I could say I want to go ahead and make the change to bronze for all of the snapshots that are configured, or I could leave them configured for what they are, and only backups moving forward would be associated with this new SLA. Click assign, and it would take place immediately and start following that new schedule. Once I have my protection, the next thing I'll hop into here is my ransomware monitoring. So I can see that under anomalies here at the top, I have a system that looks like it's been impacted by Lockbit, and there's 2 particular VMs that are underneath it. So if this was a real scenario at this point, I would initiate my recovery, and then I would also want to do a threat hunt to see how early I want to recover from. So in my case, I will go over here to threat hunts. And I'll go to my Lockbit threat hunt. Here's my 2 systems, and I can see that that particular match happened at July 23rd at 2:03 p.m. That's the earliest matched snapshot for that Lockbit YARA rule. So when I do my cyber recovery, I want to make sure that I restore before July 23rd at 2:03 p.m. That's going to be the key piece for me. So we'll go back over here to my investigations. Again, I'm under anomalies now. Click on that object at the top that I was just looking at. I'm going to start cyber recovery. And again, now I don't want to select the latest snapshots because my magic time was July 23rd, 2:03 p.m. So what I'll do is I'll say select snapshots. Up here, I will choose July 23rd, and then we'll just say 2 p.m. So now we're going to do the latest snapshot, but it must have been taken before 2 p.m. or what I was after there was that 2:03 p.m. And you can see down below, it's automatically identified the snapshot that happened before that point in time. And so I know that the lockbit YAR rule will not find a match on those particular systems because I already did my threat hunt to get ready and see how far back that went within my backup environment. So I would hit save selection, click next, determine the networking for the systems that I'm about to recover. So in my case, it's going to be connected since I don't have this disconnected, and it'll attach it to a port group called IRE network within the virtual environment. Hit recover, and then I would be back to my regular screen where I could monitor the progress of that recovery through to completion. Next thing that I may want to do with that is once I have it recovered, it could be useful to know the type of data that was on that system. So if I come over here to sensitive data discovery, what I would probably do at this point is click on demand, start on demand, select the different policies that I want to search for. And just for the sake of time, I'll select those. Maybe you want to just select all of it to get a really good sense of what type of data is on those systems. And then I'm going to look for the two systems that I was just dealing with. So it was SH2-FS01. That was one of the systems. And I'm going to want this one because I can see on the top, this is the one that's been replicated to a different Rubrik cluster. But I was dealing with the production system running on my Cork cluster. So that'll be one. And then the other one was Zafri FS01. And you can see same thing here. So I want the one that's running on the Cork cluster. I have two items selected. Click next. Give it a name for the classification. So I can say whatever you want to call it. Click start, and then it'll begin the process of doing that identification. Once that's complete, I can go back in and get a handle on this type of data that was on the systems that were just impacted by ransomware. Did I have PCI data? Did I have sensitive customer data included in there, which can help give me a sense for what my next steps are going to be. Hopefully that gave you a sense of the benefits of Rubrik Security Cloud Platform. Confidence in being able to recover your data with our Zero Trust platform, simplicity of our SLAs for backup, and the ease at which we can apply them across your environment. The ability to not only have a disaster recovery plan, but to test it on a regular basis. Knowing exactly when to recover from in a cyber event. And lastly, leveraging existing investments if appropriate for your data protection storage, as well as with data observability. We'll have a few takeaways within the event that you'll be able to review. And we'll also be at VMware Explore this year. So please stop by our booth to chat with a subject matter expert if you plan on attending.
Okay, well, thanks to Mike for putting together a really informative presentation and an enlightening demo there. Mike did put those two resources up. Once again, those are in the handout section of your console, that best practices guide for preparing and recovering from a ransomware attack and the definitive guide to zero trust data security. You've still got a minute to grab those if you're interested in them. A lot of you had questions that unfortunately we don't have time to get into in this session, but we will make sure all those get to the Rubrik team for possible follow-up. Okay, and before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card today is Chad Mackwick from Minnesota. So congratulations to Chad. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a great weekend. And at least for those of you in the States, I hope you keep cool. Hope to see you next time.